everyone. It's my name is Eddie Pierre, and it's always a pleasure for me to come to the stage and come to the social media platform and to share some thoughts with you. Again, this is our podcast, Mindful Conversation for the Critical Time. Yes, indeed, the times are critical, and we need a mindful based approach as to how we're going to engage in those social discourse and those conversations that we are having all over the world. And so this is again mindful conversation for critical mind. This podcast, it is a podcast that is looking at and designed to explore how, as we said on our site there, and as well as in most of our approach to our beginning of our podcast, it's a podcast that designed to explore how rampant of distrust, mistrust, discontent are driving the world of humanity to a utter, complete chaos. And those chaos come in the form of mental, emotional, definitely social, and psychological. And so here we are again, have this opportunity to share with you to this podcast. And again, our podcast is in full blown, and I will encourage you that to join in and literally register, give us feedback, engage us in this very critical time and conversation that we are having. Today, I want to talk to you about the concept of the human perception. And what I mean by that is how we perceive things that are happening both outside and inside of us. And what I mean also by the human perception, I believe that we are reaching a point, a time in our human history where we need to really uh, take a deep look to pay very, very close attention to the depth of our human perceptions, that it's also critical and used to make the decision we're making, to have made the decision that we have made past generation, and what we're going to use, how our perception is going to be very critical in the decision that we will be making in the future. And as we continue to use our human perception to make decisions today, it is evident that we have reached a place where our current global condition reach a critical point. Now, I know you very intelligent people out there. We know about what critical situation is. Those of you that deal with different aspect of vocations and career and jobs and working and environment, you understand the concept of criticality. And so uh, we reached a point where the earth, the global, the environment, 193 country, minus the two country that is not recognized by the UN, that's city of Rome, Rome itself, and the Palestinian territory has been subtracted off the chart, and so we often refer to 193 countries in the world. We are reaching a point of critical juncture. And with that critical approach I am referring to, that causing me to pay very close attention as to how do I join this conversation and share some thought. How do I respond to the criticality aspect of the human condition? And to remind myself that there's literally thousands, if not millions of people all over the world talking, addressing, engaging and dialogue. And again, with the technology today, using what to be known as the podcast through the technological revolution, have put us in a place where we are actually talking 24 hours a day with each other. And one of the critical aspects of our human condition is that we are talking a lot, but we are saying little. We are very restless in our comings and going, in our movements, in our interaction, but we're going nowhere. We have so much, yet we are empty and have nothing. I hear other speakers, for example, challenging their audience, one in particular that comes to mind, challenging the audience to pay attention to how well off they are in reference comparison to their grandparents. I think that's a rather insensitive approach to look at a person who's dealing with the complexity of today and to tell them what they should be focusing on is how much material they have, how much money they have in the bank, how big is their houses, how high is their educations, and the swimming pool, and the backyard, and the grocery store, and to look at those things and be grateful enough to ignore the conditions of the world and be grateful enough that they are better off than the grandparent. I think we should be very thankful for the thing we have and very, very grateful and appreciative. But the material things we have cannot, nor can they render us immune to the emotional and the mental and the psychological effect of our human condition. So I think those speakers out there who's challenging those people to be grateful for material things and ignore the emotional, I think that's very insensitive. I'm going to leave that point just that way for now, but in future time, I intend to name those speakers because I listen to the podcast. I watch them challenging members of the audience. And so for this podcast, I will leave that point there. And then in future podcasts, it is my intention to really address and name the name of some of the speakers I heard that use that term. But then again, we want to go back to the criticality of our time. What that is doing to me and my understanding of the criticality of the time in which we are living, causing me to do some very deep inner search, to really look deep inside of me, to do some introspection, to use some mindfulness approach through meditation and contemplation to really understand and to have a very, very deep feelings of what exactly is going in the world, what exactly is going on in our lives. And just a reminder, as you recall, I am adopting a platform where I am referring to all of these people that are talking into the social media, some of which are very prominent, they're very well known, they have a platform, they have millions, if not billions of followers. They are all noise makers. I call them noise makers for many reasons, but for one reason, I am identifying them as noise makers. If you look close at these very people who have hundreds of thousands, again, millions of people following and listen to the podcast, these are the very people who are promoting the Western ideology from a post-World War, even doing throughout the entire 60s, 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s. These people were in the university, building their career, writing books, publishing the journal, promoting our democratic dominance in the world. Literally demonizing any other aspect, whether it was authoritarianism, socialism, Marxism. They were demonizing any other aspect of the world, promoting the lordship, if I may refer to that, of democracy, that democracy and capitalism is the solution of mankind. Unfortunately, as I'm sitting here today speaking with you, you and I come to realize democracy is, was, and will always ever be just another system created by men and women, creating by human. And there's one thing we need to know about us as human. Anything we put together is bound to collapse. It doesn't matter how well we organize it. It doesn't matter how well we plan it out. It doesn't matter how well we sort it through. If it put together, which it did, it bound to collapse. There's nothing human can put together that will last forever. And so therefore, for those people who were back then, the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, be the prophet and the voice of democracy. These are the same people today, well-renowned names, professors and lawyers and engineers and investors, and you name them, take on the social media to call names, to call on the wokeism, to call in the Marxism, to call the left and to call the right. These people are simply continue to feeding the beast, because name calling and expand on the biological aspect of our demise, those doing nothing with regard to the condition in which we are in, that, as I indicated, that I believe that it reached a proportion of critical juncture. And so I listen to them, I listen to the podcast, I deem they are nothing but noise makers. Some of them come across just like a regular TV show, entertainment. And so therefore, there is no way, it matters not how clever we can discuss our issue of the world. It matters no how much psychological explanation, terminology, concept we use. It matters not how we intellectualize our situation in the world today. It matters not how we educationalize our condition today. There is nothing we can do that will change the course for which we are heading. It is our own doing for many, many years. And so, what the critical aspect of the human condition is doing to me, and I'm sure it probably doing to many of you out in our country, in the United States, as well as around the world, it causes me to really pay a very close attention to how I am feeling with regard to what I am experiencing in the world today. And it causing me to make sure that I understand the thought that I am sharing, come to a point that I believe it's time we really, really take to heart what exactly is going in our world today and what exactly is going on in our lives today. And to go back to the concept of noise, our world is noisy and loud. Our lives are noisy and loud. There's lots of noise in our head. Our hearts are noisy and loud. Our internal self is in utter chaos. We are not well. We are not well mentally. We are not well socially, definitely, and we are not well psychologically. It took us years to get to where we are today. And so we need to pay close attention not only to the political and to the environment, to the economic, to the education aspect, but it's very important for us to look at the biological base of what exactly is going on in our lives personally and how we end up where we are today. It is critical, my friends, for you to take a step back and really ask yourself this question: what's going on in my life? Me personally, where I'm at exactly in my life. Again, if I may make a point, I hear speakers that tell the audience that to get up, stand up, grow up, take personal responsibility. I think all of those points are very needful. I think they're okay. But we need to also realize to the point that we are where we are, it's going to take a completely paradigm shift from individual to even ascertain the possibility of changing the course from which we are heading. But the part I'm talking about is that for each of us to ask ourselves this question, very important question: what's going on in my life? What exactly that is going on inside of me with respect to the condition of our world? There's one thing you need to, I come to realize, and that's not being cynical. If you still believe that politics and politicians will solve the world's problem, you are very naive and lack intuition, because politics and all of its subsequent derivatives are nothing more than organized chaos. Politics and politicians will not, cannot fix nor solve the problem of our human condition. There is a term, human condition. See, we are in a condition, and the condition we are in takes us hundreds, if not thousands of years. But if we want to pick a pinpoint, a time, it takes us hundreds of years to get to where we are today. And so if you look at politics and politicians were and are very instrumental in bringing the world in the state of critical stage that it's in. Politics was, and politicians were very and continue to be instrumental in bringing these chaotic situations which our world is facing. So therefore, if you still believe that politicians can solve the problem, that our election system can solve and will solve the problem, you're very naive and you will lack the intuition. And so I'm going back to what I said earlier, that each of us need to take to heart and ask ourselves this very personal question: what's going on in my life? And then you can transpose that question globally: what's going on in the world? And do the same thing. How did I get where I'm at? How did the world get where it's at today? The aspect that I wanted to really highlight, and I'm looking forward in previous podcasts and some of the research and the study I've done and continue to do, one very, very critical component that is missing in all of those social platform and all of those speakers and all those loud voices, people who are talking but saying nothing. One of the very critical aspects that is missing is the spiritual aspect of what's going on in the world. You see, we're not simply flesh and bone, We're not simply biological. We're not simply having a body and a mind. There is a spiritual part of us, and there lie the critical point of what's going on in our lives. If we address, which we have been doing, if we address all of our social, all of our economical, all of our political, all the educational, the philosophical, and the biological aspect of whatever it is that's going on in our lives, and ignore or fail to address the spiritual element, we are setting ourselves for complete failure and meltdown. Because without addressing the spiritual element of each of us, there is nothing we can do physically, mentally, politically, psychologically, educationally, intellectually will take us out of this married clay that we find ourselves in. And so for all of those loud speakers out there who's using their psychology and the intellectual crowds to yelling and screaming about the demise of mankind without addressing the spiritual element of what's going on in each of our lives spiritually, we are not going to get too far. In fact, nothing is going to change if all we do is addressing the outward, the economic, the political, the educational aspect of, of our lives and what's going on in the world. And this point brings us to one of the aspects that I share with you in our preview podcast was the world take 200 years plus or minus. We as a world take a couple of centuries to remove everything that was right, and what I mean by right, everything that was godly, everything that was religious, everything that was have anything to do with the collective aspect of the what come to be known as the church. It took us a couple of centuries plus and minus to work very hard to remove every aspect of anything that was religious, anything that was spiritual, anything that was godly in our lives and in the world. In fact, we see that even in United States, one of the aspects of United States, and as I talk to hundreds and people over the years, Americans like to throw in our faces this separation of church and state, that we need to keep the church separate from the state. Well, not only that never happened, but that is a folly. That's an illusion, because politics and religion is one of the same. I often baffle when I hear people talking about the separation of church and state in the United States. And then every time I look at an inauguration, President-elect of the United States will summon the most influenced preacher in this country to administer the oath of the office of the President of the United States with the right hand sworn in on the religious book, the Bible. And the same politician will turn around and promote the separation of church and state. I think that's a bit confusing. Individual, ordinary American, very, very forcefully glad to tell us that there is separation of church and state in this country to keep our church out of the state. And every time you turn around, from governors to mayors, we are all sworn in, taking an oath, and often, and the oath so help me God. But that's hypocrisy. Because if indeed there is a separation of church and state, we should find another means to reach to invoke our commitment to the oath of our political office. But if you're going to invoke the name of God and take an oath of allegiance to adhere to the fundamental principle of a higher power, and that context would be God, it would have to, it behooved us, therefore, to say, are we living according to the dictate and the authority of the Holy Scripture? But the answer is no. I watch all party president, including both Republican and Democrat, both will take the oath in office and end that oath with "so help me God." And these people believe in abortion. These people believe in same-sex marriage. These people believe in homosexuals have the right to be married. These people believe now, as we know, going in our country, transgenderism. Those people believe in all sort of, contradicting idea that contradict the scripture, while a few months ago they were taking a note for the office that end with "so help me God." And I don't hear anybody addressing those things, those hypocrisy and those illusion, false, misleading, because I feel so uplifting when I see my president stand there, invoke the name of God as a guidance principle to adhere to the office from which they're about taking, only to find out later on every policy that politician is put in place is contrary to the "so help me God." And so that's one aspect we see how we are removing every aspect of God in our lives. And I just use that to make a point. In addition to, in the United States, any congregations you walked into, when you walked into a building in our churches, including the one I attend, you see in the corner of the sanctuary, here's the American flag. Well, that's interesting. The sanctuary, it's a holy place. The American flag is not a holy emblem. Oh, yes, it's a very, very powerful emblem. It represents our national heritage in our country, the flag of the United States of America. I will always adhere to it and salute it from a political point of view. But the flag does not belong in the holy sanctuary, if indeed that place were adhere to be a sanctuary. Again, where is the separation of church and state? And simply to make a point that how we say one thing and we do something completely different. Preachers are preaching false doctrine and sanctuary with the flags right there. And so there is a conglomerate confusions that going on and how we are addressing the issues by saying one thing and doing something entirely different. And so again, it's how we are systematically removing anything that is godly, anything that is moral, anything that is actually logical in our lives and in our country, which is part and parcel that bring us where we are today. And I also make reference how during the 80s and the 90s, how there were those movements that were began where most people were promoting cohabitation, live together outside of the bound of holy covenant, as we call it in this country, holy matrimony, a marriage. It was promoted, and the religious community have done nothing to address that all through the 80s, by the time we get to the 90s, it was acceptable that a man and a woman can live together outside of the bound of Holy Covenant, and it was acceptable. And so now look at the condition of the church today. Look at the condition of our Christian heritage today. And so another point I would like to raise, and I plan to address them more critically in the future podcast, is that Christianity is falling apart. Not God, the Christian community is under severe duress. People all around us professing to be Christian not adhere to the authority of the scripture. And so, how did we get here? Well, that's because for many years, as evil and indecency and immoralities was infiltrating our congregation all over this country, preachers and congregations turned to blind eyes and now look at the condition of our religious community. I mean, it is very much saddened to look and hear of the mockeries that are making with regard to God, with regard to Christianity, and what I consider to be definitely blasphemy with the behavior of some to demonize and to make unwholesome remark regarding God, regarding the church, and regarding Christianity. These are the points I am saying that are causing me to take a deep look and to ask myself this question: what's going on in my life? Should I say something? Should I take a stand? Should I voice an opinion? And as I mentioned to you in some of the short videos that I shared with you in the past, which it is my intention to do so, that we are creating a future for the next generation that will come, that will be suffer tremendously for the decision we are making today. And if that was not sufficient, that it is, I submit to you, there is a God. Let me say that again. There is a God, and there is a God in heaven who is beholding every thought, every word, every action we are taking. And according to the Holy Scripture, these are recorded in the book of life, and that the time is near, the time will come where each of us will give an account for the actions, for the words, for the thoughts, and for the deeds we have committed. And so, woe is me if I said nothing, if I turn a blind eye, if I pretend that nothing is happening, and if I turn a deaf ear as though I do not hear what people are saying regarding God, regarding Christianity, and regarding the Holy Scripture. And so these are the things I am very, very concerned about, that compels me, that move me, that shake me to take on the social media myself and to have a podcast. I am concerned, though, I am very concerned that I do not become another noise maker. And I have to be very careful. I don't get drawn in some of those useless conversation, some of those empty, vain dialogues that are going. They're very stimulating. Oh, yes. If you listen to some of the speakers using the psychological powers to have very vibrant conversation and have guest speakers who fills with knowledge of the politics and the economics and the policy drivings and the elements, and they understand the regulatory system of the bureaucratic system. They are noisemakers and false prophet. That's what they are. Because these were the same people who were building the wealth, the career, the fame, while all of this was being orchestrated in the background of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the 80s. And now today, take on the social media, thinking that it is their responsibility to control the chaos of this world. They are nothing but noisemakers, and beware of noisemakers. And so we need to turn in to ask ourselves this question: what's going on in my life? The noise in our heads, the chaos in our personal lives, and indeed to ask ourselves those questions: how do we get where we are today? And as I shared with you a few minutes ago, without addressing the spiritual component of not only what's going on in our lives, but also what's going on in our world, we're not going anywhere. And second, there is a God. I submit that emphatically, that there is a God in heaven who's beholding our actions and our deeds, and we will be held accountable for the things we are doing today. Make no mistake about this. We will be held accountable. And so it is my intention to raise a voice simply to bring to our awareness, oh, I know there's a bunch of noisemakers out there who can speak your heart out with great, vibrant, and very dynamic speech. They are noisemakers. That's what they are. False prophet, pretentious noisemakers. Be warned and beware of these noisemakers. And so I want to thank you for listening to Mindful Conversation for the Critical Time, the podcast that is a product of In Search Innovations, designed and intended to explore how rampant discontent, distrust, are bringing our human world of humanity to utter chaos. I thank you for listening. Until the next time, listen. And again, please, I want you to join me. And if you can register, we will make all that information available to you at the bottom. Check my YouTube to listen to these podcasts as I share them with you. And I thank you for your time, and I thank you for listening. I want to thank everyone for listening. And if you haven't subscribed, do so to stay tuned with our future conversation. Again, this podcast is a production of In Search Innovation. Once again, thank you for listening.